32% of LGBTQ Americans stress about money every single day.
28% of us don't have access to a company-sponsored retirement plan.
2/3 of LGBTQ folks with employer-sponsored healthcare can't cover their partner.
Yet 26% of LGBT Americans and 38% of transgender Americans make above $100,000 a year, compared to 31% of Americans overall.
What are these? They're just some of the many stats we found in the newly published Motley Fool Debt-Free Guys LGBTQ Money Study, and a glimpse of what we're talking about today with Jack Caporal of the Motley Fool on episode 319 of the Queer Money Podcast.
We've got a lot to share, so let's get on with the show.
Welcome, Jack Caporal, to the Queer Money Podcast. We're excited to have you.
It's great to be here.
Awesome. So I think this shows the value of persistence, because for David and I have tried to do a sort of state of LGBTQ finance study for the last several years, and almost had it happen twice with two different companies
since 2018. We've been trying to do this since 2018.
And for all sorts of reasons, it almost happened and then never did. Like, for example, there was a pandemic. It kind of changed everybody's objectives. So we're excited to finally be able to partner with Motley Fool to sort of conduct a state of LGBTQ financial wellness study. So thank you, Motley Fool, and thank you, Jack, for joining us to talk about the Motley Fool Debt-Free Guys LGBTQ plus money study.
Yeah, it's our pleasure. I think, well, hearing that you've been trying to do this since 2018 is kind of a bummer, but I'm glad that we were able to get the study at the door. And I think hopefully this is the beginning of a series of studies that we can do in the future, maybe on a yearly basis, kind of track some results and to see how things are changing, or we can ask some different questions in the future based on current events. But my sense is that we're just scratching the surface here. I think there is a lot of demand for the data that we found, and we have some interesting results to discuss as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah, totally.
You bring up a good point. We started trying to do this since 2018, and the world has changed dramatically since then,
Totally.
right? And whether you're a part of the queer community or not, it is highly likely that your financial situation has changed. Some people have done extremely well during that time period, and we know a lot of people, their financial situation has changed drastically for the worse. And so it's kind of interesting that we're taking this snapshot just shortly after the pandemic seems to be waning. Let's cross our fingers, seems to be waning. So maybe some people are feeling a little bit more comfortable. Let's hope. But the data is very interesting. And I'm glad that you talked about this idea of continuing to take this snapshot. Are we seeing progress, right? It's one thing to take a snapshot in time, but our community is constantly looking for progress. And that's what we want to see here with our finances as well.
Yeah, 100% agree with that. I think there's also, again, going back to the issue of y'all trying to do this since 2018, the other thing that shows is that there's a real lack of data available on the LGBTQ plus community. And given that, I think that calls for more consistent data gathering. And listen, if no one else is going to do it, let's do it. Why not?
I love it too. So let me dive a little bit deeper there. Why did you think, or why did Motley Fool think it was important to conduct such a study? Simply because there's a dearth of the information out there, or were there any additional reasons to that?
Yeah, so there's like a smaller picture and then bigger picture answers to that question. I mean, they're both, I don't mean to belittle the first half of my answer. They're both important, but so about a year ago, we did a kind of roundup article that incorporated all the data that we could find on the financial state of same-sex couples. And we just realized that the data in this area is really, really lacking. There's just not a lot of it. The Census Bureau was really the only government agency that we could find that collected any data on the LGBTQ plus community. And that was just data on same-sex couples, right? So that is a tiny slice of that world. There's no detail on sexual identity, gender orientation, etc. There's some data collected by non-governmental organizations, but some of that is published in a pretty like academic way. It's like a 40, 50 page report, not very easily digestible if you're kind of just trying to get a handle on the state of the LGBTQ plus community's finances, right? And then there are some good surveys that have been done by financial institutions, but we thought more could be done. I think that's how we connected. You all, correct me if I'm wrong, you all saw that article and were like, let's team up and do a bigger survey. But then, and obviously we're all for that. And part of the reason, this is the bigger picture, part of the answers, part of the reason we were all for it is financial inclusivity is really important. It's a value of the Motley Fool. We try and make the world smarter, happier, and richer. So the entire world, right? We're not very selective in terms of who we're trying to help. And my sense is that there is a large chunk of Americans who don't feel like the world's investing and finance more broadly are necessarily welcoming to them, or maybe for them. They feel a little bit out of place in them, or that the messages coming out of the world of finance and investing don't really click with them. And that's a shame, because anybody can be an investor, anybody can budget and improve their financial well-being, right? And just the LGBTQ plus community in particular, the last time a survey was done, 7% of American adults identified as LGBTQ plus. That's probably an undercount, I would guess, but that's still close to 20 million people. And it's important to understand how those 20 million people interact with the world of finance if they face unique financial challenges, and to better understand how we can help them as part of the world become smarter, happier, and richer. So that was long-winded. I apologize.
No, that's perfect.
I'll add in here, folks. One of the nice things about what we did with Motley Fool when we partnered on this look at LGBTQ folks and money is this is the first study that is solely looking at LGBT folks. In the past, when we have gotten data from other organizations, and you've heard us talk about these other organizations, the LGBT community has been a minuscule subset of a larger study. And this time we approached Motley Fool and he said, can we just please just look at our community? Let's not make the LGBT community a 10% sample of this overall study. Let's just look at the LGBT community. And what that did is that allowed us to get a much larger sample. I'm thinking about Prudential and Mass Mutual, and we're very grateful for what they've done in the past with their studies. But our community ended up being a couple hundred people in their overall study. And this study is 2,000 LGBT folks and what they say is going on in their lives when it comes to their current financial situation and how they feel about their finances. So again, we're very grateful to be able to work with Motley Fool on this one.
Yeah, no, this was a great partnership. And I'll just harp on this again. At least 7% of American adults identify as LGBTQ plus, probably an undercount. That's still 20 million people. I don't think that should be treated as a footnote in terms of, how we view financial well-being in this country and whether or not certain Americans face financial challenges. 20 million people. So a lot of individuals, it's also a lot of money, right? Mm-hmm. So I think it's in everybody's interest, whether you're on the corporate side of things or you're someone who's trying to better understand how to improve your own financial state. It's worth taking a closer look for sure.
100%. And David offered a great segue there. Can you give us a little bit of context of how you're kind of the engine behind this study? Can you give us a little context of how the study was actually conducted? We polled 2,000 plus people, and then all the little cogs that go into that.
Yeah, well, you're giving me too much credit because when you guys approached us, you sent us like, and stop me if I'm revealing too much. You sent us like 500 questions, and they're all amazing questions. But we
We've been
we
doing
had
this
to have
for
a
a
little
minute.
bit, and you know, hopefully we'll be able to ask all of these questions eventually over years and years of doing this study and different iterations to come. But we had to pare it back a little bit and make it a little bit more readable and
Jack reined
digestible
us
and
in a
help
little
us.
bit.
Yeah, well, I tried my best.
Yeah.
But what I'm getting at is we could have asked hundreds of questions, but we didn't, just to make the results a little bit more manageable for us and for the readers. But we still wanted to work together on a survey that would capture financial well-being holistically. So we asked questions in a bunch of different categories and areas of finance. We also wanted to mix qualitative and quantitative data, right? So, how do you feel about your retirement progress, your progress towards saving for retirement, and also, how much do you make, how much do you have in savings, et cetera. Had a mix of those questions. We surveyed 2005 LGBTQ plus Americans. About 50% of the respondents identified as cisgender LGBTQ plus, 35% identified as transgender LGBTQ plus, and 15% identified as genderqueer or non-binary. So those responses, they're a little overrepresentative for transgender and genderqueer non-binary individuals based on, again, the most recent polling data I've seen nationwide. But those are the categories that we've seen the least amount of data for in terms of what's out there. So we wanted to make sure that we captured how those communities are doing financially.
Right, cool. Can we do a timeout?
Mm-hmm.
Is the sound going in and out for you, or is it just me?
I'm fine.
Okay, then I'm having a problem. Can you speak, Jack?
Yeah. How's this? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Good.
Yeah, that's good. I don't.
Okay.
It was just going in and out, kind of very weird.
No,
Okay,
I'm fine.
so if it's just me, then it's just maybe I'm losing my hearing. Cool. Thank you for that summary. I think it's going to be very helpful for people to understand exactly what the nuts and bolts of the study were. So we're going to dive into some of those details shortly, but we thought maybe we could start the conversation sort of at a high level. What did we all think were the biggest takeaways from this survey? Every time you do a study like this, everybody kind of they're shocked by or surprised by one particular element more so than others. So I'm curious what all of us thought. So we'll throw it to you, Jack. What stood out to you most?
Yeah, for sure. So I would say a couple things stuck out to me. One is that transgender Americans are really outperforming their peers in a number of categories. They tend to have higher credit scores than other folks in the LGBTQ plus community, more savings, etc. So I wouldn't say that came off as a surprise to me, but that's something that stood out. And then the other kind of overall takeaway that I have is I think if you look at a lot of the results together as opposed to individually, you do see some evidence, some explicit evidence and some implicit evidence that there might be an inclusivity issue when it comes to financial education or adoption or access to financial tools. And I think I suspect that's something that we'll touch on throughout our conversation. But just taking a step back and looking at all of the data, that's something that stood out to me. And yeah, it's something that Motley Fool has done a little bit of work on in other areas, other projects. So yeah, be interested to dive into that topic.
Yeah, 100%. What did you think, David?
Yeah. So, I guess to me, it's not necessarily a surprise. And it kind of ties in a little bit to what you were saying here, Jack. But it's reinforced. But this is actually reinforced by specific numbers that in 10, we had one question that had 10 examples of where LGBT folks feel comfortable making financial decisions. And in every single one of those, less than half, and in some cases, less than a quarter of us felt confident about making the financial decisions that would improve our lives. So if less than half in things such as basic as paying off credit card debt or saving for emergency savings, if we don't have the confidence and understanding on how to do that, no wonder we see some of the financial results happening in our community, which again, I think what you had mentioned is either speaks to this lack of inclusion or lack of attention, maybe what's happened, we are being so distracted by other things that we are not focused on or not aware that we need to focus on, and the value that focusing on those things could bring to our lives.
Yeah, I think that's very poignant. And I think we talked about this a little bit before the interview. Some of that distraction that David pointed out earlier could be the fact that we're still fighting for our rights, right? Everything that's going on at the state level against attacking the LGBTQ community, that seems to like suck all of our attention. And so maybe our finances doesn't seem as important as it should be, or as it could be.
It's not front and center. John and I were just talking about this prior to starting the podcast, is that if you're a predominantly straight white, moderate to moderately conservative or conservative couple, you're not really fighting for a whole lot in your life right now that is beyond yourself, right? You're not fighting for your community. You're not fighting for rights. You're just fighting for making your own life better. And then but if you are a queer person or a person from a minority communities of color, you're constantly being barraged with, not just from folks outside of your community, but politically, media. You're constantly getting this barrage of distractions about things that you should be doing or needing to be paying attention to, and that just wears your decision-making ability down. And you get decision fatigue. We all get decision fatigue, but we have all these other decisions that are constantly hitting us, and so that may be part of the reason why we feel less prepared or don't have the confidence to make those kind of decisions.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And, I'll just quickly make 2 points here. It might not even just be decision fatigue, but time, just the lack of time. You're focused on other efforts and other challenges that are unique to the LGBTQ plus community that, the person that you used in your example obviously doesn't have to deal with those same challenges, and they've just more time to read about their, company 401k match policy. They have more time to read about how to build a budget. They have more time to put all of their, their budgeting numbers into a spreadsheet and see where they could be saving more, et cetera. They just have more time. And everything that you just described, as well as what I see as justification for the study and the work that we did, right? So individuals and communities in unique social locations obviously face unique challenges, and those unique challenges play out in a whole range of different ways. And yeah, they can certainly have an impact on your finances. But beyond the numbers, they have an impact on how someone approaches finance, how much time they're willing to spend, how much mental energy they have. And that gets into bigger questions, I think, that a lot of companies could probably learn from. So are the messages that we use when we're pitching our financial products, are they engaging members of the LGBTQ plus community? Are they reaching them? Are they impacting them? Do the values that we have align with the values of the community that we're trying to reach, et cetera? And if you just do a national survey and then you carve out your little 10%, you're going to miss a lot of nuance, I think. So yeah, couldn't agree more.
Yeah, 100%. And so I think what struck me the most might be sort of bring this all home is that 2/3 of LGBTQ Americans have a high amount of financial stress. And this is, to me, even more striking, is that 26% of LGBTQ plus Americans stress about money each week, and 32% of us are stressing about it each day. So while we might not have the time or the energy to do anything about it, or the messaging might not be connecting to it with us, or we might not know where to go to get the information or feel prepared to make the decisions, it's still affecting our lives. And even if that's just a little bit of stress, that stress compounds on itself, and it's also compounding on the other things that are causing stress to us. So it's having an exponential effect in how we live our lives. And unfortunately, it's probably, to David's point, it's always the last thing that we're going to get to. I'll get to that later. And I think part of the problem too is the pay inequity, and that maybe it's like, the beginning of the funnel is so thwarted that worrying about the rest of it just seems, ridiculous or futile. And so let's focus on the top of the funnel, when in fact there are multiple ways that we could improve the entire funnel, our entire financial picture. Obviously, pay equity being one of them, but there are other ways that we could do it. So I feel like, God, tackling this one particular question, we could really dive into a whole episode.